And I'm looking forward to your talk, sir.
No, it's good. Nice to see you.
A very good morning to one and all. My name is Ayush Gupta and I'm an officer trainee of the 96 Foundation course. I warmly welcome. Am I audible, sir? Am I audible to the honorable guests?
Oh, yes, you are.
We can hear you, Ayush. Yeah.
Right, sir. So I warmly welcome Justice Venkateswarlaya, Dr. Bala Subramaniam, Director, sir, Joint Director, ma'am, all other faculty and OTs to this second Justice Katikithala Ramaswamy Memorial Lecture. So I would like to speak a little about memorial lectures. So see, unlike when we name a road or a building after a person, where a name is usually just abbreviated and forgotten, in a public memorial lecture, I think that a part of that person tends to stay on with the audience. We all tend to think about it, we tend to reflect on it and grow from it. And in that way, I feel that the memory of the honored tends to live on with the audience. It becomes a part of public memory. So this lecture on Justice Ramaswamy was institutionalized by the Academy last year. And I feel that it's such a fortunate coincidence and our good fortune that today his illustrious son is today with us as the director of this very Academy. It really goes on to show how the greatness of Justice Ramaswamy is sort of reflected in the qualities that our beloved director exemplifies. Sir's commitment to hard work, his integrity, his deep devotion towards the cause of the poor, and his sense of fairness, I feel, is aptly reflected in his upbringing. So being trained in the legal profession, I've had the opportunity to really read the nuanced judgments that Justice Ramaswamy has delivered. And to give the welcome address for Sir is indeed a dream come true for me. So Justice Ramaswamy was a judge of the Supreme Court from 1989 to 1997. He, in my opinion, was a part of that small group of judges who transformed the Supreme Court of India into the Supreme Court for India. Justice Ramaswamy has delivered an astounding 2,227 reported judgments, a record which has been unbroken. Sir is known for his pro-poor judgments, and he was a veritable tour de force when it came to the rights of the marginalized. So I've also had the good fortune to appreciate some of the judgments that Sir had given. Notably among them, the Samata judgment on tribal rights, which is the subject of today's lecture, the Madhu Kishwar judgment on gender rights, the Valsama Paul judgment on protective discrimination. And I'm sure we all the officer trainees are familiar with the Esa Bomai judgment, which till today forms the cornerstone of center-state relations. So I felt that it would only be fitting that this memorial lecture on Justice Ramaswamy be delivered by a legend of the Indian constitutional law. Again, being a lawyer, it gives me such immense pleasure to introduce the Honorable former Chief Justice of India, Mr. M.N. Venkateswarlaya. So I'm pretty sure that all present here are familiar with this doyen on the Indian legal scene. Justice Venkateswarlaya served as the 25th Chief Justice of India from 1993 to 94. In fact, as I was writing this address, it just struck me that I was born in the year 1994 when Sir was already the Chief Justice of India. Sir has also served as the Chairman of the National Human Rights Commission from 96 to 98. Sir also headed the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution. I'm sure as all the officer trainees in their preparation have gone through that report, and I for one know that I've quoted that report in many of my answers. I warmly welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our lead discussant for today is Dr. Ramaswamy Bala Subramaniam. So welcome. Sir is a development scholar, an author, a public policy advocate, and a leadership trainer known for his pioneering development work with the rural and tribal people. Sir founded the Swami Vivekanand Youth Movement, a development organization based in Saragor when he was just 19. After spending 26 years in development work among rural and tribal people, Sir has pursued academic degrees in leadership, organizational development, and public policy. Sir is also a member of the Capacity Building Commission of India. Sir has kindly agreed to join this lecture from the opposite end of the globe and be a part of this gathering. I thank you, sir, and I warmly welcome you.
Thank you.
Now, without further ado, I would like to proceed with the program. I would kindly request Director Sir, Joint Director Ma'am, and Bindu Ma'am, and other members of the faculty to please offer floral tributes to Justice Katikithala Ramaswamy. So we have also been joined by many eminent people virtually as the audience. And we have with us Mr. Harsh Chauhan, the chairman of the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. We also have many other eminent guests who have joined us to honor the memory of Justice Ramaswamy, including many NGOs who have worked in the field of tribal welfare. So now I would like to request Justice Venkatachalaya to begin. Now I
Thank
would like to request Justice Venkatachalaya to begin with his memorial lecture. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Esteemed Sri Srinivas, esteemed Dr. Bala Subramaniam, esteemed members of the administrative services, ladies and gentlemen, this is a tribute to the exemplary life and enduring contribution of one of our eminent judges, Justice K. Ramaswamy. Justice Ramaswamy was born on October 11, 1933, as a child of Katikithala Ramaswamy and Jogamma in a small village in the West Godavari district. His grandfather predicted at the time of his birth that the child would become a great man in future. This prediction has come true. With the death of his mother when he was just 18 months, the story of his loneliness and his struggle through the wilderness of life's experience commenced. His story tells us how he not only survived but prevailed. The message of his life is that those who insist on the very best from it often get it. Challenges in his life were many, not the least being the considerable braving of social discrimination. Justice Ramaswamy reached great heights, surmounting obstacles by relentless striving with determination and fortitude. Where lesser men would have lost heart, given up, and resigned themselves to the inevitable fate of anonymity. Life, his life holds a stirring message for posterity. His life's dominant theme had been his abiding faith in the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his own life by ceaseless endeavor. From a schoolboy alternating from one charity hostel to another, Ramaswamy's childhood is a moving story. A Greek writer, Nikos Kazantzakis, writing about Albert Schweitzer, whom he called a modern Francis of Assisi, confided that large teardrops had smudged his manuscript. While writing about the travails of his own early life of poverty and deprivation, tears must have welled up in Ramaswamy's eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, I've had the pleasure of watching the career of Justice Ramaswamy with great admiration for the grit and determination of a man who never compromised with principles. I know the tyranny of superlatives, but at a stage in life when one comes across face to face with great duties of honor, dignity and friendship, one does not pause to measure his words. Ramaswamy was a gem of a man. Justice Ramaswamy was sensitively aware of the debate about the dilemmas of development. He gave expression to his views in many of his judicial and extracurricular pronouncements. I admire and share his views. The debate of development versus environment, about development versus social justice, raises certain prickly issues, but Justice Ramaswamy shared the view and often expressed them in a forthright manner that public goods such as education, health, human dignity and security are not the rewards of development, but are essential inputs and ingredients in the very process of development. He shared the view that economic prosperity does not trickle down. It needs informed, focused intervention of the state to build up a healthy and vibrant social infrastructure. Justice Ramaswamy spoke and wrote passionately about the tales of deprivation of the Dalits and the tribals. It is estimated that globally over 100 million people or so have been displaced over the past 10 years alone. In India, millions of people, Dalits and tribals particularly, have been uprooted from their homes and hearths, joining the amorphous, faceless mass of human anonymity. It is estimated that between 1951 and 1990 alone, some 21 million people have been uprooted owing to development of mines, dams, industries, wildlife sanctuaries, roads, railways, etc. It is rare to find such great combination of earnestness, enthusiasm, dedication, integrity, and hard work. Justice Ramaswamy was a model and personification of true family values. He is blessed by his children who share his ideals, values, and virtues. He was proud of his children. His wife Shamla Devi was the very personification of the true Indian wifely goodness and an ideal wife. In the Samata case, Samata was the state of Andhra Pradesh, 1997. The question was whether mining leases of government land in the scheduled areas could be granted to non-tribals. Justice Ramaswamy wrote the leading judgment, with Justice Zakir Ahmed concurring that transfer of land in the scheduled areas, even by the government, is impermissible. There was a dissenting note by a third judge. The substance of the verdict is this: Schedules 5 and 6 of the Constitution constitute an integral scheme for protecting the tribals from exploitation and to preserve land for their economic empowerment. The predominant object of para 5.2 of the Schedule 5 is to impose a total prohibition on transfer of immovable property to any person other than a tribal. Transfer of immovable property to a non-tribal in the agency area tracts is held to be null and void. The transferee acquired no right, no title, no interest. The expression person includes state within its ambit and all juristic persons, and not merely natural persons. The minority views that the person in the context meant only natural persons, and there is no constitutional prohibition for transfer of lands in scheduled areas to non-tribals. A later three-judge bench in Balco employees case, speaking unanimously through Justice Kripal, expressed reservations about the majority view in Samata case and observed that the interpretation of Schedule 5 should have been by a constitutional bench of 5 judges, and that in any event, Samata did not apply to Balco case as the language of the regulations were different. In this tribute to the memory of Justice Ramaswamy, I shall refer to some areas which engaged his creative mind and troubled his conscience. Clean air and environment. Another deep concern of the judge was environmental pollution, which as a member of the National Human Rights Commission, he bestowed special attention to. Among the great civilizational concerns of our times is the issue of global warming. Some of the hottest years in the last 150 years have occurred since 2000. Atmosphere and ocean temperatures have drastically increased with disastrous consequences to human survival. Snow peaks are melting. Ocean levels are increasing, inundating low coastlines. Fossil fuel power plants, automobile emissions, and excessive consumption are the main contributors. They are our civilizational ills and deceptions. Global warming is a consequence of pollutants like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, called the greenhouse gases, trapping heat from the Earth's surface and radiating it back to the Earth, energizing hurricanes, melting icebergs, fueling heat waves and storms, and with disastrous consequences to human lives and habitations. Some of the causes and effects are enduring and are almost irreversible. Naysayers contend that all these fears are exaggerated. The direct connection between concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide and heat levels was scientifically established in 1894 by the work of Arrhenius, who was awarded in the year 1903. Michael Carson's book, Silent Spring, expressed great concern about the safety of the world of nature in consequence of activities of humans, particularly in the indiscriminate use of chemical insecticides and pesticides, polluting aquifers, water streams, etc. Mother Earth is a highly sensitive entity. No one can exhaustively define what a cubic inch of earth means and is. It is not just a mixture of sand, red mud, and clay. It is a highly sensitive home for biotic communities and living organisms. Nature and all its living forms, man, animals, birds, trees, insects, are mutually interdependent. If you kill all the bees today, humanity will come to an end within a few years. It is these insects that pollinate plant life. In terms of money, the value of pollination of bees in the growth of crops is said to amount $500 billion every year. In view of this sad experience of man and his extravagant living, issues and compulsions of sustainable development acquired a sharp focus, and I have discussed some of the issues in the paper. But then there are reasons to be sadly pessimistic about the future of human race, for it does not seem to know what is its own good. Humans, with their ecological liberation, approach nature with the spirit of conquest, with the armory of a conqueror. After all is said and done, what is the great achievement of man's scientific quest? The sum total of all human knowledge in science can be compared to a small ball floating in the vast expanses of the unknown. The bigger the ball becomes, it only enhances the areas of its contact with the unknown. It is therefore wise to approach Mother Nature and her benevolent manifestation in humility and respect, and not in the spirit of a conqueror. The Greeks therefore called the earth the alma mater, the bounteous mother. Our tribal population is said to be over 110 million, distributed in various states of the country. The problem is particularly acute in the central region of India, which is otherwise rich in mineral deposits and forest wealth. Exploitation of the Adivasis is ruthless through indebtedness, ejectment from their lands, and displacement owing to developmental activities. Poor quality of governance is another factor. The most disturbing point is that despite all developmental activities, the decline in poverty levels of the tribals is slower when compared with the other social groups. Poverty, illiteracy, lack of potable water, poor nutrition are galling. The value of the resources extracted from tribal areas greatly outweighs the funds employed by central and state governments for tribal welfare and development. A ratio of 2:1. There is substantial net flow of resources from the underdeveloped tribal periphery to the more developed non-tribal urban and lowland agricultural and industrial centers. The net imbalance would have been felt most in the mineral and forestry. In the mineral and forestry rich tribal economies of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Orissa. Administrators do not fully comprehend the factors contributing to this vulnerability. Naresh Chandra Saxena, his views are worth recalling, and I have extracted a passage from his writing. A word about tribal life and culture. Does the history of the tribals represent a sedentary, primitive, cloistered world frozen in time, or do the tribals represent a more humanitarian, less individualistic social philosophy of community living? Enlightened insights disclose a tribal philosophy of life which is of non-individualist, broad, liberal philosophy of community life and common good. It is now coming out though slowly, the non-sedentary worldview, rich in values of truth, beauty and goodness, and a rich heritage of art, music, tribal medicine, and tribal and medicinal plants, and a sense of premonition of the tribals for portents and oncoming natural disasters. Nehru's vision was that very rapid modernization of tribal culture might conflict with the foundations of the fundamentals of the tribal culture. Very Elvin considered that the culture of the so-called modern man was not civilized enough to deserve the great values of tribal life and tribal culture. Elvin Verriers, Elvin Verriers was the very first serious attempt to speak to the outside world, showcasing a great treasure house of culture and values of tribal life, which earlier was considered dispensable primitive fetish. Sir George Grierson's Linguistic Survey of India also did not do justice to the vast range of tribal linguistic variety and diversity. In recent years, scholars like Ganesh Devi and others have shown how this rich heritage has suffered gross cultural neglect. Devi's painted word is a sensitive tribute to the Adivasi literary genius. In recent times, there is a flood of tribal literary expression drawn from tribal archives. Unfortunately, tribal resistance to exploitation of resources led to serious estrangement and protests like the Pathalgadi movement, Kisan Lang Morcha, Niyamgiri protest and other movements. Justice Ramaswamy was a sensitive recognition of the seeds of this turmoil, and the tribal values were basically inconsistent with the values of the modern transactional society and values. Ladies and gentlemen, the new world of technology, which I have called The Brief History of Tomorrow, is a subtitle borrowed from an interesting book, Homo Deus, by Yuval Noah Harari, describing the great exploits of science and technologies and their disruptive effect. The book, Fantastic Voyage by Raymond Kurzweil and Terry Grossman, speaks of the speed of technological advancements and says that the exponential growth in the 21st century will equal 20,000 years of progress at today's rate of progress compared to 20th century, 1,000 times greater than what we witnessed in the 20th century. 21st century promises a growth 1,000 times higher in speed than that we witnessed in the 20th century. Humanity will witness an explosion of technologies in science, medicine, and genetic sciences. As a result, a new set of economic values emerge with new conceptions and tokens of wealth, of privileges, of economic power. Cryptocurrency, blockchain technology are just the beginning of a whole host of forms of new forms of economic power. Society will flounder in its ability to administer these new forms of wealth. Enormous and uncontrollable economic disparities emerge. The present system of governance will be unequal to these challenges. Government responses will be unable to keep pace with the speed of change. Though men have been amazingly creative in science and technology, they are equally amazingly non-creative in finding solutions for some of the deepest morally sensitive issues of human survival. The extraordinary exploits of science and technology will create unequal societies with concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few. The new technologies may even compel political, social, and economic systems and behavior to change, adopt, and become compliant. Voter choice and voter preferences will become predictable and controlled. In every age, even after everything contentious and debatable is taken out of the way, there yet remains a remarkably wide and firm unanimity as to what is fair, what is just, and what is beautiful. If wielders of power ignore this, divergence becomes marked and they fall out of respect. The next topic which I have briefly mentioned is what we owe each other. It's a rethinking of social contract. I have borrowed this title from the two eminently readable and educative books of the same title, one by Minoche Shafik, Director, London School of Economics, and the another book by the same name by T.M. Scanian. These writings point to the imminent need for a great new social contract compelled by the great changes unleashed by the new technologies and their consequences on social equilibrium. Here I want to use an example that Minoche Shafik uses in her book, What We Owe Each Other. A new social contract, she invokes the intertemporal role of the state in spreading income and managing risk across our own lives. For example, at the outset, the state builds universities and colleges and provides subsidized education to people. This is done with the expectation that this person who avails the subsidy then goes on to work, earns money, pays taxes, and contributes to the treasury of capital that is used to fund the education of the next generation. So, more than a linear flow, the tax system relies on a cyclical flow to ensure sustainability. So, in the words of Minoche, what the common man expects to be a Robin Hood function is in private a intertemporal function. Plato asked, what do men organize themselves into society for? And answered, to give the members of society, all the members, the best chance of realizing their best selves. He thus made the duties of wielders of power in an elevated one. Many philosophers have discussed and debated social contract of John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, to name a few. Conceptually put, it is essential. It essentially cites the act of giving up some amount of freedom and coming together as a community bound by rules in return for security and guaranteed fundamental rights. Once again, this coming together also necessitates a feeling of community and brotherhood. Minoche in her book says that the social contract is broken. This social contract is broken. It is difficult to disagree. Man incomplete by himself needs the companionship of his fellow men to complete himself for the ordainment of his own destiny and fulfillment. Democracy provides the best opportunities for this self-interaction, its social interaction. With the dramatic changes that will characterize this century, particularly in the concentration of wealth and its consequences, humanity has to search for systems that provide security, new social contract. It is necessary to build a framework for it. Every society has to put a floor on individual income, below which no one can fall. Share risks, enhance opportunities. It is broadly similar to the concept of minimum guaranteed income. The great and wide disparities in income and standards of living should be tempered and civilized with the corresponding obligation to ensure a minimum standard of income for all so that abject poverty and destitution are eliminated. Policy makers and administrators have to meet these great challenges of our times. Ladies and gentlemen, I call this the bureaucracy's finest hour. This is the great expectations from trained administrators in the near future, what is expected of them and how they handle these sensitive and delicate forces of imbalance in society. And Confucius said, it is dangerous to live in interesting times. We now live in such interesting times. India's independence was preceded by a century of westernization and collective thinking on moral issues and national issues. The role of the bureaucracy in a democracy raises some prickly issues concerning the overlapping roles of the political executive and the administrative machinery. America toyed with the spoil system. A great political party, it is said, is the one that has a good stomach, not to reject anything, but to assimilate everything. Its idiom must be consensus. It should avoid all excesses. It should look after all groups, look after all groups. Political executive makes policies. Permanent civil services execute the policies. In a parliamentary system of democracy, unlike in the presidential system, there is a fusion between the legislative and the executive wings of the state. Emergence of strong political party Emergence of a strong political party inevitably throws up issues of interference with the day-to-day administration by the local political leaders, breathing down the neck of the administrator. This is a potential irritant. Disintegrating political systems have two consequences on the bureaucracy. Either the administrative machinery overrules itself, or there is interpenetration with the political process. The undesirable effects of such situations on the moral tone of the bureaucracy are well known. The third influence on the bureaucracy today is the increasing technological tools. The debate on the relationship between ideas of merit and efficiency in administration is acquiring a sharp edge. Lord Macaulay's view was that those who acquitted themselves well at the universities generally made their mark in the civil service and in the professions. The purpose of that education, it was said, was to open, to invigorate, and to enrich the mind and enlarge and strengthen understanding. There is, of course, a debate whether mere academic distinction define the kind of personality best suited for efficient administration, and whether there is an empirical correlation between academic merit and the concept of efficiency in administration. The changing vision of the role of bureaucracy in a democratic setup has sharpened this debate. Michael Sandel, though in a different context, critically examines this issue in his beautiful book, Tyranny of Merit. Despite the stubborn idiosyncrasies of the Indian civil service, despite its stubborn idiosyncrasies, the Indian civil service has provided proverbial steel frame and has at one time considered the fourth or the fifth best administrative machinery in the world. An eminent British judge, Lord Ratcliffe, spoke of the talents of the British officers in India, though their remit was to serve the interests of the British and ignore the interests of the locals. But Lord Ratcliffe, a very eminent judge, quoting Macaulay, says, after the doubtful splendor of Hastings and Clive, there was the spotless glory of Elphinstone and Monroe. They were men, he says, who after ruling millions of subjects, after commanding victorious armies, after dictating terms of peace at the gates of hostile capitals, after administering the revenues of great provinces, after judging the causes of wealthy zamindars, after residing in the courts of tributary kings, returned to their native land with no more than a decent competence. They retired on a small pension with all the splendor behind them. Secondly, Lord Ratcliffe says, it was the age of young men. It seems almost ridiculous to read that Metcalfe, a junior in the political service, though admittedly an old Etonian, he was sent at his age of 19 to negotiate the withdrawal of the armies of Holkar, the formidable Maratha chief. They got on splendidly. He was only 23 when he led a mission to Lahore to treat with Ranjit Singh, the Lion of Punjab. He had to wait, but got his treaty of friendship, an act of great importance for the consolidation of the British Empire in India. After that, Elphinstone, at 30, seemed almost a veteran when he goes out as envoy to treat with Shah Shuja at Kabul. Still, at the close of his address to the Afghan king is probably a fair example of the spirit in which these young men advanced upon their extraordinary task. He says, I concluded by saying that we had often been at war with the entire world and never suffered in the contest. That's the kind of self-confidence these administrators exuded. Lord Ratcliffe continues, and I quote, India in those days roused in our men the sense of wonder that a strange country rouses in an explorer. They were inquisitive, fascinated, if sometimes repelled. The chaos and misery that they found provoked their sense of order, their latent capacity for government. But the spectacle did not make them contemptuous or hostile. Instead, they became painstaking historians. They composed Persian grammars. They wrote great double-decker volumes on travel. The most active seem to have found time to write the most. Please listen. Kindly see this. The most active seem to have found time to write the most. Malcolm with his Central India and the history of Persia. Elphinstone with his massive history of India. Outram, the conquest of sin. Todd's history of Rajputs remain classics. Herbert Edwards, A Year on the Punjab Frontier, is remarkable on several counts. The personality of the author, the people he had to deal with, and his extraordinary gift of writing. The message of the Monroe's message, Monroe was a mystic virtually. Monroe's message to the British administration was this, and I quote, "Your rule is alien and it can never be popular. Your rule is alien and it can never be popular. You have much to bring to your subjects, but you cannot look for more than a passive gratitude. You are not here to turn India into England or Scotland. Work through, not in spite of native systems and native ways, with a prejudice in their favor. Work with a prejudice in their favor rather than against them. And when in the fullness of time your subjects can frame and maintain a worthy government for themselves, get out and take the glory of the achievement and the sense of having done your duty as the chief reward for your exertions." One factor that is not emphasized enough in our administrative system is the need for acquaintance with basic principles of public law for the administrator. The constitutional philosophy pervades every area of our lives. 10 judicial pronouncements of the Supreme Court of India have changed the way we look at the relation between the state and the citizen. If the legislators enact a piece of legislation, many pages of subordinate legislation are drafted by the bureaucracy. In the developing countries, there is the usual legislative hyperactivity. Drafting subordinate legislation needs familiarity with fundamental legal conceptions. In the year 2006 alone, United Kingdom passed 5,000 pages of primary legislation, but the supporting body of subordinate legislation ran into 11,500 pages. As the custodians of the executive power of the state, administrators have the finest opportunities to integrate with knowledge, professional expertise, and wisdom the blessings of modern technology and the ideals of a welfare state. The foundation is the ideal of rule of law. Every act of state must have a legal pedigree. Indeed, the concept of rule of law is a shorthand description of the positive aspects of any political system and the foundation of any civilized society. In the end, it is our duty, I say, in the end, it's our duty to give meaning to this world and not to worship doubt. Worship of humankind is the new religion and the new human agenda. We should not exchange this great opportunity and excitement for a mere mess of pottage. At the end, I quote to you some beautiful words of Malcolm's father, who wrote to his son. I quote, a good head will give you the esteem and applause of the world, but a good heart alone gives happiness to the owner of it. Thank you very much for your patience and courtesy. Thank you, sir.
Thank, thank you so much, sir, for that fitting tribute to the great life of Justice Ramaswamy. I feel that it has really inspired us to elevate our own lives through ceaseless endeavor. Also, many of the debates that sir mentioned about the role of bureaucracy, about the debates surrounding development and the environment, I feel that we too can take some inspiration from Justice Ramaswamy to approach it with the same uprightness and forthrightness and find solutions which are in the best interests of all. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Now I would like to invite Dr. Ramaswamy Bala Subramaniam to share his valuable observations on the subject. So over to you.
Thank you so much. And I must it's indeed a privilege, I would say, to be present on this occasion for more than two reasons. One, for several of us working and having worked with indigenous communities, Justice Ramaswamy and his judgments were a sort of a inspiration that lent us courage, despite the fact that the state could, in its own way, create its own instruments of fear. So it's a privilege to be speaking today, and I would congratulate and wish Srinivas, a worthy son of a very distinguished jurist, for having put this occasion together and enable young administrators to possibly listen to what has happened and what they need to know. The second reason is, for me, having been mentored, guided, and sort of kept on the path, I would say, by Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, it's a privilege to be actually sharing a dais with him. So I think it's the first time in my life that I've even had taken the courage. So when Srinivas called me, it was tempting that I should speak. But I would confess that it's taken me a lot of courage to even be a discussant and talk about the enormous, the way justice walked us on from the basics to the culminating in what our young administrators should follow. There's so much. And what many of the people in the audience may not be aware is, talking about rights, talking about tribals and their the way the Constitution needs to uphold and protect their interests is one thing, but to actually enable it and make sure it happens is something else. And I've had the unique privilege of actually petitioning Justice Venkatachalaya when he was the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, and having the courage to sue the state of Karnataka and the Union of India for violating the rights of tribals and seeking his intervention. And today, possibly I would claim as the far-sighted judgment that he pronounced is responsible for something. All that he described and discussed today is actually was put into action by his own judgment. And he didn't pass a judgment. He made sure that a committee was set up, headed by none other than the distinguished Sri Chaman Lalji, who was then the former DGP of Punjab, as a special rapporteur to oversee that his judgment is actually implemented. So I think it was not just Human Rights Commission, it was a Human Rights in Action Commission. And that was an extraordinary privilege for me to have been a part of. So I think there are a lot of lessons for us to learn. Sir, I would like to draw from what you spoke. And I would like to wear the hat of an activist again. And my own view is, well, the Constitution protects tribals, and while the Constitution speaks so much about the interest and welfare, I fundamentally have a great problem, and I would like to hear your thoughts on this. I think a state is always looked at indigenous communities as recipients of welfare. And you brought it out in your own way, and how you explained that they were actually upholders of the concept of sustainability itself. And there's so much that we can draw from their embedded wisdom. There's so much that we can learn from them. I even think it's fundamentally a flaw that the state itself calls them primitive and vulnerable. So even to classify them as primitive, vulnerable tribal groups, I think is fundamentally wrong. That's my view, sir. And that itself makes possibly the future administrators believe that I have to be the provider. And it sort of puts us on a platform where we think we need to give and the tribals will take. And that is, I think, something which is erroneous in my view at best, and absolutely wrong and violation of every right of, every way, a right to a dignified existence of the worst. So in this context, how do you get a society to appreciate and understand that these communities are possibly the future of the world itself, not just for India? And the knowledge and wisdom these communities possess, whether it is medicine, whether it is jurisprudence, whether it is sustainability, whether it is their own understanding of economic theories, or whether it is diversity of life itself, and the celebration of life itself, in my view, how do you even reconcile bringing in the moving mindset from an obligation that we need to do for tribals to actually considering it a responsibility to learn from them? And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, sir, and how do you see this? And can we ever do it, or it is just a romantic image that I have? And I know in this audience we have Harsh Chavan, who's the chair of the National ST Commission. We have Ravi himself from Samata, who I think who was responsible for the Samata judgment. Several people who are here, and many of them might share what I say. How do you really see these communities as providers and not benign recipients of a welfare state? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, sir, the first issue is you turn your obligations of the state towards the citizen, basically, from one welfare-based to right-based thing. It must be obligations of the state to the citizen is not a welfare concept. It is a response to a right and a corresponding duty in the state to provide for it. That kind of obligation, that kind of redefinition of the relationship between the state and the citizen has emerged over 100 years. And in one judgment, whether the state has an absolute right as an individual to deal with business matters, a dissenting judge, Justice Matthews, way back 50 years ago in Kerala, he dissented and said, "My dear friend, you are asking me the hour of the night. It's already morning." And that beautiful statement was quoted by the Supreme Court, which upheld the dissenting judgment and set aside the majority view of. See, the whole concept between state and citizen must change, and it is changing. And the inheritance of our administrative culture is from the British rule and their policy. Their efficiency was excellent, but their purpose was different. And that has to change and is changing. And I find in the Human Rights Commission, I remember we had the cabinet meeting of the state government held in your campus in the dispute which we dealt with the Jain Kurba's liberation from this kind of grip of the administration. We persuaded, I think S.M. Krishna was the chief minister. He held a cabinet meeting in your office. In your office. That was the kind of perception of the change. And now what is happening is that the enormous amount of economic power unleashed by new technologies, concentration of wealth. That's why I've given a subtitle in this talk that either you have democracy or concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. You can't have both. And this transformation must come from an awareness of the fundamental concept of the relationship between the state and the citizen. And an enormous amount of change is going to happen in the next 10 years. And you're right. We have seen that I've examined about 60,000 complaints in the Human Rights Commission in my 3 years of tenure there. You know the kind of work that was expected of us. But change will certainly come. The state and citizen relationship is changing, and the future administrators are bright men, brilliant men. They are no longer they are extracted from the higher echelons of economic sections of society. They come from the general people, the mass of people, and this kind of modern socialization of services, and I have great hope in the present generation of administrators. They are knowledgeable, they have a sensitive awareness of the feelings of others. Culture is defined as a sensitive awareness of the feelings of others. And this culture is a part of the administrative culture today. At 93, I am more optimistic about it than I was at 60. And I tell you, the world is poised for a change. And thanks to the great activists, perhaps like Bala everywhere, they are bringing out great awareness. And I'm sure that the present generation of administrators are no less conscious of this kind of need to preserve. If we want to preserve anything of our society, it is necessary to see that our attitude towards the vulnerable sections. The problem is we call it sections of the people, the Dalits, the minorities. the backward classes. They constitute the people. They constitute 75% of the population. They are not sections of the society. They are the society, and the power is in their hands. And what is required is enlightened political leadership. And enlightened political leadership is something which, in the hands of the people themselves. If you vote the way you do now, you won't get any better government than you deserve. Somebody said, in a democracy, you get the government you deserve. Bernard Shaw made a small amendment. Democracy is a system that assures that you don't get a better government than you deserve. So things are going to be much better. And the administrators in the audience will ensure that your hopes are, your vision and dreams are turned into reality. Don't worry. Thank you.
I take a cue from what you said, sir, about the current crop of young administrators who come to actually I would say it's a privilege to be part of the public service system. And I do agree that a lot of change is happening. The state itself has evolved from being a provider in the 47 when we got an independence.
I tell you, I have the way in which, I tell you an instance where a political a lawyer belonging to a political dispensation was the public prosecutor of a district. And there was an ICS collector there. And the public prosecutor used to have access to his office for official discussions and carrying out discharging his duties. That public prosecutor became member of parliament very soon thereafter. Then he, as a member of parliament, he barged into the collector's office. The collector stopped him and said, "You were then my public prosecutor, you had access to me. Now you are a politician. Please fix an appointment earlier before you come to my office," and send him off. How many people do that today? Not that it is a good thing to do that, but the kind of the penetration between political executive and the administrative machinery is a matter of great sensitiveness and a great concern. In England, I'll take only 1 minute to tell you, the ventilatory jurisdiction of the Parliament to examine complaints against the bureaucracy was found, they're finding it cumbersome in the actual legislative process. They made a beautiful substitute. There was an institution called the Parliamentary Commission for Administration Act. It was done in 1967. Parliamentary Commission for Administration Act. And it only a member of the House of Commons can make a complaint against the executive officer to this commission, the Parliamentary Commission, the famous British Ombudsman. And it's only a member of the House of Commons who can make a complaint against an executive officer, administrative machinery. And he investigates it, puts it before a parliamentary subcommittee, because it must have the imprint of the parliamentary sanction, because it's the function of the parliament essentially, the ventilatory function. And then the officer is punished or exonerated depending on the circumstances. The whole essence of it is done within 80 days. 80 days. And there are very practical, beautiful solutions. But there are all, even in England, there are extraordinary instances of administrative neglect. You remember in 1808, there was an office created, a security force was created to stand at the top of the Dover Cliff with a field glass to find out whether Napoleon was approaching England or not. So there was in 1808, Napoleon perhaps died in 1821, but this post was abolished in 1945. This post was abolished. This is to speak of the British efficiency in administration. Of course, everybody has its own things, but one thing, sir, things are changing. Things are changing. Your good work will not go to waste. Your good work will provide inspiration for many others. There are many people who are doing it, and interacted as chairman of the Human Rights Commission with hundreds of police officers and hundreds of executive officers. They know inside what is just, what is fair, what is good for society. But there are some compulsions which they can't explain. They can't explain. They must be liberated. I think they must be liberated from the political, too much of political interference. Some degree of political interference is healthy and necessary, because in a democracy it is ultimately you are accountable to the. There's a lot of things that can be discussed, and but I am an optimist, sir, and I have seen such great work in Orissa. Kalhandi, in fact, it was put into our lap, and I had the advice of Mr. N.C. Saxena how to go about handling the issues in the Supreme Court, put that into our lap. We handled that very well. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Again, one can keep listening to so much of wisdom that you always bring to us, sir. I agree that we are going through enormous transition. The state itself is going through a transition. Even for an activist like me to be inside the state, sometimes even my activist friends are surprised and impressed both, saying that itself is a demonstration of the proof that the state is transitioning. I would say, so for the young people in the audience who come there with the spirit of wanting to serve, also have to be tempered with the reality of what you said, the political executive being real, and that's part of the parliamentary democracy system itself. But sometimes I always feel that the administration, we may have to insulate citizens also from the extremes of administration. And that's my view again. And I would say it as understanding state as a facilitator and seeing state as possible as in its own way as an exploiter, because we look at the way today human development happens around the world today, with economy being the major focus and rest of it just being incidental necessities. In such a situation, we talk of circular economies, we talk of stakeholder economies.
You see that Sarkozy Commission report. I think all of us must bestow some attention. There are 4 Nobel laureates in that commission.
Measuring our lives.
No, that the title of that commission was, I think, measurement of economic performance and social progress. Measurement of economic performance and social progress. You see the beautiful report. Thank you.
And with that kind of a background for young administrators, where they need to understand that, even when programs like the District Mining Fund, which is what is executively created, or even things like the Forest Rights Act, in principle, there's a wonderful instruments of change. But when it comes to the practical realities of implementation, sometimes in the hands of administrators who don't seem to understand that compassion, empathy go hand in hand with understanding people and communities. It is not just implementation of rules. And today we have the Capacity Building Commission itself. It wants to move them from a rule-based thinking to a role-based approach. How do you see this shift happening? Can it be done through training programs? Can people like Srinivas and Labasna actually bring about this change? Or it is an individualized experience?
You see, in fact, my own personal view is the need for greater interaction of administrators with the judiciary. The Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy and the National Judicial Academy. I started it when I was in the Supreme Court, and it is we had to persuade the government, and the Prime Minister was so generous that we have spent over 100 crores on that in the National Judicial Academy at Bhopal. And I think I may request Director Srinivas to have a kind of a understanding with for mutual exchange of views. There is so much that each of us could learn from the administrator from the judge and the lawyer, and there is so much that you could do. And it requires a speedy thing. You can't wait for more than 5 years. If you don't change within 5 years, you will never be able to change. And the forces of change are so intense and acute that you don't give time. Tomorrow is too late. Tomorrow is too late for you to change. And well, good thing, sir. And I think all of us must have good education from your hands of how to handle social issues like that. See the marketing, agricultural marketing, the kind of things that we have seen, terrible things are happening. And
I think
huh?
Ayush is waiting there to remind us possibly of running out
I,
of time. But I would like to close with two remarks, sir. One is, I've had this early part of my life. I always wondered whether state is a facilitator or state should we protect citizens from the state itself. And today I would say we have come a long way and say that we are partners with the state. And in this view, two concerns I have is, and I think young administrators may want to consider this as they learn to understand indigenous communities. Control of local natural resources is a reality we must have to deal with at some point of time. And indigenous communities are the custodians of local natural resources. And the last part is...
I'll tell you one small thing, which, with your permission, will take only 1 minute. I was judge in the High Court some 50 years ago. I was in the High Court here. An assistant commissioner had done something which is subject matter of a contempt of court of proceedings. It was outrageous conduct on the part of the young officer. It was outrageous, and my colleague in the bench was determined to convict her and send her to prison. After the conclusion of the argument, a gentleman stood up in the audience and he said, "I am the collector of the district. I'll take full responsibility for this offense that she has done. I'll accept punishment on her behalf." I said, and he made such a touching tribute of a senior officer protecting a junior officer. And ultimately, we had to acquit both of them. We found that the justification was, and it was, that was a lesson to me to see how administration runs. It's not something of a, Monroe in his essays on society and politics and society, he said administration is not it's a waste of one's time to expect the administrative machinery to be a contraption with escapements and balances and this thing. It is not so. It is a rugged of a machine, huge machine which runs on greed and need. This is a huge rugged machine which runs on greed and need. So administration is very, very difficult. And in fact, in circumstances, we have seen once they persuaded the leader of the opposition in a state to admit that he was in prison for public purposes, to subside a commotion. It would lead to violence and public disorder and public violence. So he was not arrested, but the police department persuaded him to announce that he was arrested, so that the situation came down. It's a very, very sensitive thing, Baba. See, in fact, 25 years of my work as a lawyer and 25 years of my work as a judge have told me administration is not just some go by exact strict rules. Sometimes you have to make very imaginative. In fact, once in Hyderabad, the Godavari barrage broke down. There was a commotion. Godavari barrage, the famous illustration of British contribution, of British officers' contribution, was impeached in Parliament for the work that he did for the benefit of the people in Andhra Pradesh. When it broke down, the Chief Minister, in an emotional thing, announced the Judicial Commission. And after that, every member of the cabinet said, "Why did you announce the judges do all kinds of things? And why did you submit yourself to judicial tyranny by inviting them?" And the chief secretary was invited. He said, "I have made an announcement. How do I handle it?" He said, "You see, tomorrow and after the holidays, go have a nice dinner and sleep. We will see one day when the assembly comes back, we will see." When the assembly assembled again, the terms of reference had not been announced. And the chief minister announced the terms of reference are not how this broke down, But how did it last so long? How did it last so long? The moment it was said, everything was consumed in humor. Uh, Consumed in humor, everybody laughed and forgot about the subject. This is the resourcefulness of good administrators.
So with that note, possibly, I think we leave it one thought. One concern that for people like me, having worked with indigenous communities, despite affirmative action, despite constitutional
Uh,
protection,
First
we feel
Elvin Verrier Memorial Lecture was by me in Tejgat
wonderful.
Academy, in Tejgat Tribal Academy, and I had suggested a sports competition between the tribals and the police who had a long-running feud. There is a sports competition. The tribals won, the police lost in the game, and they built up bridges of friendship.
Similar to that, hopefully
Thank you, sir.
someday,
Thank you.
someday possibly at least in my lifetime and in all the young administrators' lifetime, we'll see the emergence of true tribal leadership, not promoted, not patronized, not facilitated by the state, but in partnership with the state. And I hope that will happen at some point of time. So it was a great pleasure and a privilege, sir, to be just be here with you to discuss these thoughts. And I know I've been privy to several of these thoughts with you, but for all the young administrators. So I thank Srinivas for this extraordinary opportunity and for bringing all of this young officers to listen to such words of wisdom. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bala Subramaniam. You mentioned that it was your pleasure. I believe it was our pleasure that you are here in our gathering today to bless us with your insightful observations. Thank you so much for leading this very insightful discussion full of anecdotes and interesting observations that you led. I'm sure that each one of the officer trainees present here today will now approach their duties as a civil servant with much more compassion and much more with a sense of responsibility towards the marginalized sections and the tribals. Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to call upon our Joint Director, ma'am, Ms. Radhika Rastogi, to please come up on stage and offer the concluding remarks.
Honorable Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, former Chief Justice of India, Dr. R. Bala Subramaniam, Member Capacity Building Commission, Shri Srinivas Ramaswamy Katikithala, Director of the Academy, Shri Harsh Chauhan, Chairman of the National ST Commission, my faculty colleagues, all the distinguished guests who have joined us online, and the officer trainees of the 69th Foundation course. Oh, 96, I'm so sorry. This is the second memorial lecture in the series of Dr. Justice Katikithala Ramaswamy, which is funded by the endowment created for this purpose. And this endowment also sponsors a rupees 10,000 award for the toppers in the law module in phase 1. My sincere thanks to Justice Shri Venkatachalaya for sharing his impressions about Justice Ramaswamy as a person. Gandhiji was once asked to give his message to the people of this country, and he said, "My life is my message." Justice Ramaswamy's life is also one such. He lived his life as though it was a message to each one of us. His achievements will serve as a source of inspiration for us to do better and work harder. Just 3 days ago, I was in the district of Bharuch in the state of Gujarat, and I interacted with the officials there. And they told me that it's a very highly industrialized district, but it has a substantial tribal area also. And they said there's a provision in the Land Revenue Code 73AA, which acts as a hurdle in the process of development because it prohibits the transfer of land from tribals to non-tribals. And when I toured this tribal area of Bharuch, I found that the tribals were well aware and they could have become partners in the process of development, but not in the way the administration maybe wanted to define development. Many times we see that tribals are somebody who have to be given the benefits in a top-down kind of a manner. Whereas they can definitely be partners in development if we see them as partners and not as adversaries or recipients of benefits. The Samata judgment drives home this very point. The way we look at development, the way we define development, and who will be the stakeholders and who will be the enablers. I think these are all very difficult questions which each of you will have to grapple with and find your own answers. We are innovative on the technological front, yes, but not when it comes to addressing the morally sensitive issues of human survival and social issues. In the Bible, it is said that the meek shall inherit the earth. But the way we are looking at development, the paths we are choosing to progress, if we don't choose them wisely, then maybe a time will come when we will not be covered in the definition of the meek. The world around us is constantly changing, and as rightly pointed out, legislation cannot keep pace with these changes, and not everything can be codified or clarified. In Maharashtra, we say, "Mage paha ani pude chala." Look at the precedent and then take action. But what if there are no precedents? What if there's a legislative vacuum or a precedent vacuum? How do we proceed? We need to fall upon the principles enunciated in the preamble of the Constitution: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. These principles must guide our minds, our hearts, and hands. We are also accused as bureaucrats of being indecisive and playing safe. Let us not shy away from taking hard decisions. And to strengthen our hands, every legislation invariably has a section which says, actions taken in good faith shall be protected. In our careers, we'll wear many hats. Sometimes you're a policymaker, sometimes an implementer, sometimes a regulator, sometimes a quasi-judicial authority. You will never have access to the complete information in any scenario, but you will still have to take a decision. You will still have to act. In fact, I would like to quote here Justice Midha of the Delhi High Court, who said, "In the court of justice, both the parties know the truth. It is the judge who is on trial." So in all the trials that we would face, I hope and I wish and I pray that we give a good account of ourselves and always do the very best. Justice Venkatayachalaya also touched upon the principle of social contract, the intertemporal nature of state actions. How do we address the concentration of wealth in the hands of few and rising poverty and inequalities? In the words of Amartya Sen, poverty is not just lack of money. It is not having the capability to realize one's full potential as a human being. As implementers of public policy, we have the sacred duty to provide access to opportunities to combat poverty, reduce inequity, vulnerability, and suffering. There will be several merchants of Venice who will seek their pound of flesh, but it is for us to play the part of Portia and approach every issue with empathy. According to the principle, legal maxim, salus populi est suprema lex, that is, the welfare and well-being of the people is the supreme law. Today's challenges transcend national borders, and we need to face them the way we managed COVID, which was possible because all the arms of governance stood as one and acted as one. My profuse thanks to Justice Venkatachalaya for his faith in all the young officers here and administration in general. I am sure with enlightened political leadership and all our efforts, we will live up to the faith he has reposed in us. There will be several issues of inclusive growth, sustainable development, and several others that you will have to face and find solutions in your own way. In our quest for development, let us use our positions and privilege to contribute to positive change with courage, conviction, and ensure that nobody is left behind. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I believe that lecture deserves a round of applause. May I request you all to please thank all our participants. Thank you so much, Justice Venkatachalaya, for joining us in remembering the great life of Justice Ramaswamy and for sharing all your valuable remarks. I think the way that you've sensitized us about tribal life and philosophy will really stay with us in our entire careers. And also, thank you for sensitizing us to the various issues of our times, that all of these issues that we'll face in our duties as an administrator. Dr. Bala Subramaniam, thank you so much for joining us despite the huge time difference between India and the Pacific time. I believe you've really inspired us to keep the interests of the tribals whenever we are fulfilling our duties or taking any decision in our duties as administrators. I would also like to thank Director Sir, Joint Director Ma'am, Bindu Ma'am, Mr. Chauhan, all of the eminent audience members that have joined us today in honoring the memory of the great Justice Ramaswamy. I sincerely thank you all for joining us. I would also like to thank the various teams who work behind the scenes day in and night out. Basically, they are the ones that make events like this possible. Thank you so much, everybody who's worked together to make this event possible. And my dear fellow OTs, I would also like to thank you all for being a wonderful audience. I sincerely hope that you would implement and internalize all the learnings from this lecture. I believe that would be the greatest tribute to the memory of Justice Ramaswamy. Thank you all.